Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I've been a nurse at our local hospital for the last 8 years. If you're here long enough, you will come across a few ghost stories, and maybe even experience one yourself. I definitely had my share since being there, and I can name a few that were especially memorable. I will start by saying that it doesn't help that the hospital used to be an orphanage many years ago as well. So, the main one we hear about is the children of death. We call them this because when a patient sees one of these kids, they end up passing away soon after. A couple of examples was one gentleman that another nurse walked in on as he was talking to someone, but there was no one in the room. The nurse asked him who he was talking to, and he said that the young girl that just left. He said that she had brought in a card, and he pointed at it. The nurse said that she looked at it, and it looked like a young child's drawing of a person, surrounded by flowers and people crying. We had no idea where it came from, as he hadn't had any visitors that day. We even checked the logs, and his son came to see him the day prior, but no one today, and his son didn't have any young kids. A few days later, the man passed away in his sleep. He was there due to a heart attack, but he seemed to be improving. Another instance was an older lady that was there after breaking her hip. She said that she was a medium, so she was always entertaining us nurses on duty. She gave us all readings and told us some interesting stories of past readings that she had done. And every once in a while, she might ask to pass condolences on to someone there that recently lost someone, be it another patient or even our head nurse once. Her father had died suddenly, and we, the nurses, didn't really talk much about it, but this lady had brought it up. I thought she must have heard someone mention it. However, there was one instance where we received a nurse call to her room, and upon entering, she asked that we check on the woman across the hall. She claimed that she saw her walk out of the room holding the hand of a little girl. This was in the geriatric ward, so the patient didn't have a heart monitor attached, and she was bedridden because she was very frail and couldn't get up on her own. We dashed over to her room to see that she had passed away. We were shocked because while we were expecting that she would pass soon, we had no idea when, nor did we know how this other patient would have known. She couldn't have left her room, and there was no kids on this floor. So, of course, we had to go back and ask her about it. She said the lady looked spry and happy and believed that the little girl was helping her move on to the afterlife. We thought at first that maybe it was one of the children that other patients have seen, but she said that she was wearing modern clothing, a pink flowery dress with a huge flower in her hair. We thought it was a crazy situation, but we just let it go. And later on, after the older woman's daughter came in to get her mom's belongings, the medium was being wheeled back to her room by another nurse when she stopped this daughter to speak to her. After giving her condolences for her mother's passing, she brought up that she saw her as she passed over and began asking her, the daughter, about her own daughter. She started crying and was shocked that she had brought it up. Apparently, her daughter had died after being hit by a car while riding her bike a few years prior. She said that she was buried in her favorite pink floral dress with a matching flower clip. She also said that her daughter and her mom became very close, as she was her first grandkid, and when they lost her, it broke her heart. I thought maybe she recognized this woman from the news or something, but how could she have known what she was wearing when she was buried? I don't believe in mediums, but the fact that the little girl that this woman appeared to be walking out of the room with matched her granddaughter made me a little less skeptical. I used to do overnight IT work for a handful of hospitals in a small town in the Midwest that if I mentioned it, you would have no idea where it was. That said, I'm just going to say that it was in Nebraska, and I will leave it at that. It was a contract work, and it was outsourced to a third-party company. I was just out of my 2-year degree, so I took the first job that I got offered. As previously stated, that first job happened to be a contract-to-hire position, doing the third shift help desk for a group of hospitals. Basically, I would be expected to be at one of the sites and answer support tickets for this main site, as well as the satellite offices if they came in, which they rarely did. For the most part, I would have to spend all my hours at the main hospital and sit in the IT room from midnight to 8 in the morning, doing very little. There would be the occasional printer that I would have to reset or fix for the overnight nurses, but really, it was such a simple job. Now, I should have to tell you this, but hospitals are typically haunted, and I don't mean like, ooh, that's spooky, kinda haunted. No. I mean straight up haunted by the spirits of the people that died in the rooms and cannot pass on. Honestly, I could probably sit here and type a short novel of all the events that happened, but I think it's best to go with the ones that seriously spooked me. There was one night where I got a ticket for one of the aforementioned printers, which honestly were more hassle than they were worth. I got called down to help one of the station nurses connect her system to the main printer because it just kept giving her an error. I get down there, she tells me what exactly the printer is doing, and then asks how long it will take. I tell her that it will only be a few minutes, and she informs me that she needs to use the restroom. I tell her that it would be fine and that I should have it done by the time that she gets back. She then walks away and I get to work. After a few moments, I get that weird feeling that someone is staring at me. You know that feeling, that spine chill. I shrug it off and I keep trying to get the drivers installed for the printer, when I hear someone faintly say, "Excuse me." I look up and then I see an elderly patient standing in the doorway to the room and staring at me, which honestly wasn't that big of a deal. I was sitting at the nurse station and I was the only person standing there. I looked up and as politely as I could, I said, "Oh, my apologies. I'm just here to help with the computer. The nurse on duty went to the restroom, but I'll let her know that you need help as soon as she gets back." I say this, and she smiles at me with a wrinkly beaming smile, and I think everything is copacetic between us. I sit back down, and I start back into getting the hunk of junk back to a functional state. After a few moments of me working with it, I get it to connect, and it starts spinning up as the spooler pulls the job. I patted myself on the back for another successful night, and then I lean back in the chair. I glanced back toward where the elderly lady was and saw that she had closed her door. As soon as I notice this, the nurse on duty comes back. I stand up, I let her know that everything is working again and that it looked like it wasn't going to cause her any more trouble. And I then motioned toward the room where the patient was and I informed her that the nice old lady needed some assistance. When I said this, her face literally went pale, and she asked me which room. I pointed to the room with the door closed, and I told her that one. She then asked me to describe the old woman. I laugh, and I tell her that she had glasses, short white hair, looked to be in her 80s or something. And as soon as I tell her this, she shows me what it was that she printed. It was paperwork that she needed to fill out for a recently deceased patient. The picture of the patient was the woman that was standing in the doorway. She then tells me that this patient had passed away earlier that evening and that they had just cleared her room. Obviously, I thought she was pulling one over on me, and I playfully told her to knock it off. She stared at me with a deadpan stare and walked over to the room. Then she opened the door and motioned for me to look. I reluctantly did, and sure enough, it was empty. The room was sanitized, everything was clean, and the board was blank. Honestly, that kind of ruined that night, and I just grabbed my laptop and I went back to the ID closet. I didn't really want to deal with people after that one. Beyond that, and probably one of the other nights that scared the hell out of me, there was one evening where I was in the closet with one of my new co-workers that I was training. This was a year later after I was hired on full-time, and I was actually training this person to be under me. I had already explained how things worked, and he was sitting there going through the HR video training. And I was probably on Facebook just waiting for a ticket to come in, so we had something to do. We were literally just sitting there in the quiet hum of the servers, when out of nowhere, the lights in the server room shut off. My mind immediately went into the worst case scenario. I thought that the server room lost power, which would have been bad. Server rooms losing power means that the server may shut off, and we have to manually check them all to make sure that they turn back on with emergency power and that there were no errors. I look around and see that the server rack still has green lights on it, which means that they were still all good to go. I told the new guy to wait there, and I got up to go and see if the rest of the hospital lost power. When I got to the door, the switch was off, like someone had literally turned it off. I shrugged it off and I flipped the switch back to on. The newbie asked if everything is okay, and as soon as I start telling him that it was nothing, the lights seriously flipped back off. I slowly turn around, turn them back on, and then start to walk backwards, back toward the desk. And I seriously watch the light switch slowly move from the on position to the off position. It was like a really weak person was slowly pushing it with one finger, just nudging it slightly down until it was off. Well, this was enough for me, and I told the new guy that we were taking a lunch. He laughed and asked what was going on, and I told him that at the exact moment we were going to leave the server room and go down to the cafeteria to take a lunch. I had no idea what the hell kind of spirit was having fun with us that night, but I wasn't going to agitate it any further. I just decided to let it have its way. We went down and had lunch, then went back up to the server room. And when we got there, the lights were back on, and they didn't turn themselves off after that. And while that may not be creepy to some people, it seriously freaked me out, mostly because I was well aware of how haunted that hospital really was. This happened in my childhood home. It was a very old house, and it had a lot of history since there are still literal bullet holes from the war in the walls of some of the older parts. Just to give you an idea of our floor plan, my bedroom is just to the right of a screen door leading to the bathroom. So, when you go in or out of the bedroom, you always have a peek at the screen door. Whenever I come out of our bedroom, I always see a shadow peeking at me from that screen door. Nothing malevolent. It just always looks like someone is standing just to the side of that door on the other side and leaning into it so that it could peek into the other parts of the house. I can only see it through peripheral vision, and it looks like a grown man. Whenever I turn my head to look directly at it, it doesn't just disappear. It hides to the side behind the screen door. It physically hides so I won't see it, like it was caught doing something that it wasn't supposed to. This has happened more than once to me, and that's what it always does, just peeking in. Some of my siblings have mentioned to me that they have also seen it, before I even brought it up to them. So I know that it's not just me. I don't investigate whenever I see it hide to the side, because that's what people in the horror movies usually do before they get killed off. I don't know what it is, but compared to the other things that we have experienced, it seems to be the less creepier inhabitant of our house. It was a normal day on the job. Nothing for me to report, not even speeders. It was about 2 p.m., so most people were at their jobs and kids were at school. In the force, we consider this the calm in the day, as there was rarely any crimes around this time. It's usually around the early hours of the day, between 11 p.m. to 4 a.m., when things tend to get crazy. But today wasn't one of those days. We got a call about a suspicious person near a North Park high school. And while we get these kinds of calls from time to time from overly concerned parents, we are required to follow up on the call just in case. Me and my partner Jeremy parked the car in the parking lot and proceeded to survey the area. We had checked the surrounding area until we heard an alarm coming from inside the school. A lockdown alarm. In Ontario, we have alarms for when a potentially dangerous person or animal is in the building, and then they go on lockdown, locking doors and turning off the lights to pretend that no one is there. At that moment, I no longer doubted the suspicious person report as we both jogged quickly to the door. As we reached it, we called in our location and the situation. We were told to wait for backup to arrive. As Jeremy communicated with dispatch, I pressed myself to the glass to see if there was any sort of information to be had. And looking in, I noticed the door on the other side of the building looked odd. Looking closer, I noticed the glass seemed to have been broken. I immediately told my partner before moving over to secure the point of entry, and as I reached the other side of the building, I saw broken glass and blood everywhere. Was it the assailants? I kept my gun drawn and called in the blood. Whoever it was will probably need an ambulance. After losing that much blood, a person probably won't stay conscious for more than a few minutes. I was prepared to wait there until I heard a scream coming from in the building. At that moment, my instincts kicked in and I ran after it, following the blood trail to the girls' bathroom. The screaming seemed to be coming from there, alongside a banging sound, and I slowly and silently entered. As I peeked in, I see what appeared to be a man in a black hoodie banging against a bathroom stall, and the screams of a girl coming from within. Seeing this, I switched to my taser and I crept slightly closer. And while I'd normally give an order of surrender, in this case, I didn't think it was warranted. He was bleeding badly and clearly trying to hurt a civilian. I'd use a gun if it wouldn't get me in trouble or endanger the girl. So, taser it was. With an easy shot to the back, the man spasmed and fell to the ground, convulsing a little bit. I removed the darts from him before putting him in cuffs and then reporting the situation. Within minutes, the backup arrived alongside an ambulance. While I wish that this is where the story ended, there is one last thing that happened which concerns me. According to reports, when the perpetrator did wake up, he immediately grabbed a nurse and vomited into her mouth before going limp. And the man passed away almost immediately afterwards. Cause of death? Autopsy said that there was a major damage to his spinal cord and brainstem. What caused it? Well, they're still investigating. And while they were investigating, the nurse also passed away. Same cause of death. According to her co-workers, she seemed to be acting odd, like she was a different person. The only person who was present at that time was her teenage son. Apparently, she puked on him too, only to drop dead within the same minute. While no one knows what happened, I have a theory. Looking back at the footage of the perpetrator's death, just as he was puking into the nurse's mouth, I noticed something. If you look ever so closely for a split second, it looked like something was wriggling into her mouth. The nurse fell over and seemed to convulse for a second, which doesn't seem too strange given what just happened. But what if it wasn't? Update. The nurse's son is dead. Same way, same circumstances. Officials have called it some sort of new sickness, but as far as I'm concerned, it's something much worse. I just hope that it decides to leave our town and go somewhere else. It was the summer of 1987, and I was 17 years of age when this experience occurred. I lived at my aunt's house, and I decided that I was going to visit my sister. We both lived in the same city that summer. My sister at that time was married and had 2 small children, and she and her family lived in a house with an attached farm to it. The best way that I could describe this house is like an old-fashioned redwood farmhouse, and though it was in the city, it was surrounded by trees, and in the back were a couple of old shacks and chicken coops, but it didn't have any chickens. Although my sister had a front door, they always preferred everyone to use the side door. And as you walked in, immediately to the right was a doorway that led to a long, narrow, and dark, creepy closet. And just inside the doorway and to the right was a bathroom. And towards the end of the closet was another door that led to a barn. The side door opened into the kitchen though, and immediately there was a dining room, and if you walked in there, to your right, there would be a big old living room, and then another right would be a bedroom and another bathroom. Just walking into that place gave me the creeps. I don't know why at that time, but it just really did. My sister never really told me anything about the history of the house, and I don't know if she didn't know or just thought nothing of it and didn't mention it to me. Well, like I said, on this particular day, I went to go and visit her. While she was doing her laundry, I decided that I would go and explore because I was getting bored. Little did I know at that time that my boredom and my curiosity could have never prepared me for what I was about to see, and it would leave an image in my mind that I would never forget. Anyway, after using the restroom, I walked down the long dark closet to the door that would lead me outside into the barn. And for some reason, as I approached that door, I went to open it, and then I just froze. Something told me not to open that door, but I didn't listen to my gut feeling. As I opened the door, you had to step down 2 steps, and I did this. I turned, and for whatever reason, I looked up into the loft, and there was a guy up there with a rope in his hand. It was almost like he was staring right into my soul, even though I knew it wasn't me he was looking at. But either way, I just stood there frozen, unable to say anything. I watched as the guy put the rope around his neck, and then he jumped. I heard the rope tighten and the sickening snap of his neck as I tried to scream, but nothing came out. My heart was pounding so hard that I thought it was going to explode. I don't remember how long I was there, watching the ghost just swinging. For reference, I am a female, and this happened to me in the summer of 1984 when I was 13 years old. Well, anyways, that summer, my parents sent me and my twin sisters to camp for the summer. For obvious reasons, I will be changing the name of the camp to Camp Up High. Camp Up High is located in the Angeles National Forest near Mount Wilson, which is 52 miles from Long Beach, California. Well, anyways, we get to the camp and are introduced to our camp counselors and then given a tour of the camp. Well, I immediately fell in love with it because it was so beautiful, but my twin sisters didn't seem too happy. Later that night after dinner, the counselors gathered all of us together around a campfire to tell stories, roast marshmallows, and make s'mores. About a week after getting to camp and during dinner, one of the counselors named Running Rooster told us that the next day we would be getting up early and going on a hike to another campground where we would spend the night. Getting up the next morning and after breakfast, we all went to our cabins and gathered up our camping stuff and then met up with the counselors at the snack barn. The counselors made sure that we were all there, and then we started off on our hike. I remember being excited because I have always loved the outdoors. Now, mind you, this was during the 80s, long before cell phones and social media, so hearing stories about cryptids, skinwalkers, and dogmen were unheard of. I just remember how beautiful everything was, and the smell of the fresh pine trees and the sounds of nature echoed around me. I also remember while walking on the trail that there was a group of trees to my left. I then heard a sound that kind of startled me at first, but when I looked, I realized that it was just a group of soldiers on the ground for a training mission. While standing there and watching them, it dawned on me that I was way behind my group, so in a hurry to get caught up with them, I didn't notice how quiet everything became around me. After crossing a small stream to catch my breath and realizing that it was too quiet, I started getting scared because I still didn't hear or see my group. Well, that's when I first heard something moving diagonally to the right of me, and that's also when I smelled whatever it was. And darting my head to the right, I saw it. It was standing half behind one of the pine trees. In shock, I was unable to move or scream. I just stood there staring at whatever it was. Whatever this creature was, I know it had to stand at least 7 to 8 feet tall. All of its body was covered in semi-long brownish hair except for its face. It almost looked human, but its arms were longer than they should have been, and its hands were huge. This thing was large and its legs didn't look like it could hold its weight. I remember how god-awful it smelled, and I almost wanted to puke. After standing there for what seemed like forever, I heard my name being called off in the distance, breaking me out of my trance. I took off running towards the group, and that's when I realized that whatever that was chasing me. Hearing my name again, I ran even faster because I just wanted to get the hell away from it and be safe. And after getting back with my group, I realized that it had stopped chasing me. So I started calming down. And that's when one of my sisters asked what was wrong with me, and I just told her, "Oh, it's nothing." I don't know what I saw that day, and I still don't. But I can tell you that it was not natural nor human. It is something that I have never forgotten and is forever burned in my memory. Please forgive me, as I am not the best storyteller. But when I was a kid, the house my mom and stepdad lived in was indeed haunted. Story goes that the kid that lived there before my stepdad killed his parents. These are my experiences and what all happened in that house. Not all of them were freaky or cruel. Some were actually kind gestures. And my mom and I lived in that house until I was 12. So right outside my mom's room, there were 3 rusty red finger streaks, the same color as dried blood, down the wall. Then a couple more on the wall, then also down the hall. They would paint over it, and it would come back. Paint over, come back, paint over, and come back. That's how it was. We would also wake up to cabinet doors slamming. One night, my mom woke up to them slamming. She walked out to the kitchen thinking someone may be robbing us, and she saw a shadow on the wall. She flipped on the light, and there was nobody there. One early morning, after my stepdad had left for work, someone sat down on my mom's bed and then covered her up with a blanket. One time, I got locked in the bathroom. Since then, I would make my mom wait outside the bathroom when I was in there. Someone grabbed my cousin's ankles one night, and my mom had touch lamps, and they would flicker and turn on and off. And one morning, the dishwasher had been ran and the dishes were clean. Stuff would also go missing all the time. The stone in my mom's wedding ring fell out, and it was lost. When we moved out of the house, my mom went back in to get her keys to leave for the new home, and the stone was sitting right next to her keys. Now, my mom had left my dad for the neighbor, and my dad still lived in the house across the street. I know, it's kind of messed up, but he would watch the house when my stepdad and mom went out of town. He would see the lights turn on and off at night sometimes. I was pretty young when this all happened, but I remember them pretty vividly. And to this day, I don't watch haunting movies. They mess me up pretty bad. I watched The Conjuring, and I couldn't sleep for a week. In the summer of 1989, just before I turned 6 years old, my family and I lived in a small duplex at the end of a cul-de-sac. We'd lived there since I was about 2 years old. Our duplex was set back a ways and there was a long driveway between our door and the street. My mom was close friends with a family that lived directly across the street. Their single-family house had a small front yard with a gate that opened up to a walkway that led you to the porch steps. Up the steps was a nice porch that ran the length of the front of the house, and of course the front door. They were an older couple whose youngest daughter, who we'll call Irene, still lived with them, and they had custody of their young granddaughter due to some issues that their oldest daughter had with drugs. Irene was a year older than my sister, and their granddaughter was just a little younger than me. It was nice to have someone closer to my age to play with. My sister is 4.5 years older than me and was too cool to hang out with a little kid, and she was just happy to have an older friend to hang out with too. We were always going over to each other's houses, and they were more like extended family than friends. So when the older couple asked my mom to keep an eye on their house while they went out to dancing, of course, she obliged. Irene was babysitting the granddaughter, as she had done several times before, and they just wanted someone else that they trusted to keep an eye out. They had 3 big aggressive dogs out back that only liked the older couple and would attack anyone else, so there wasn't much worry of intruders. It was a good neighborhood, and back then, neighbors had keys to each other's houses, even though most rarely locked their doors. Every 20 or so minutes, my mom would call their house just to check in. It was the usual, "Are you two okay? Is there anything you might need? I'll check back in a little while." And then she would hang up. Now, before we proceed with the story, I should probably mention that their house was always very dark and had the feeling that the darkness wasn't just a lack of lighting, but more like a complete saturation of the shadows within it. It was always cold, even in the peak of summer in New Mexico. I know it sounds weird, but I'm sure that some or most of you can relate. Seems we've all had an experience with a place like that at some point. After some time went by, my mom picked up the phone and dialed their number. It just rang and rang. Now, call waiting had just become a thing earlier that year, but not everyone had it, and none of us on that little dead-end street did. So, my mom grew concerned, but she hung up and decided to wait a few minutes and try again. Maybe they were using the bathroom, or maybe eating and couldn't get to the phone on time. As soon as she set the phone on the receiver, it rang. She jumped because she hadn't expected it. She lifted it up and answered, "Hello?" Static came from the other line, and it was loud. I remember her yanking the phone from her ear and shouting into it, "Hello? Irene, is that you?" The static seemed to get louder, and then more quiet, and then back to loud. I remember hearing the faint sounds of a child crying and a girl shouting back, but the static was too loud. My mom shouted into the receiver, still holding it about a foot from her face, "I'm going to call you right back. There's a bad connection." And she put down the phone onto the receiver. I was standing a few feet away watching this. As she picked it up to redial, something caught my eye from out of our living room window. The window faced the driveway that we shared with a few other duplexes, and the street, and ultimately the front of their house. I walked about 3 steps over to that window and looked across the street. Now remember, I'm almost 6 years old, so things don't immediately sink in for me at this age as being odd or out of the ordinary. I'm just seeing what I'm seeing. And as I'm watching, the lights in the windows of the 2 front rooms are blinking wildly on and off, and the porch light was too. My mom was on her third redial and putting her shoes on when I heard Irene answer in a frantic state. I couldn't hear her exact words, but she was hysterical, and my mom just shouted over her to say that she was going over there. She hung up and told me to lock the door after her. She shouted to my sister, who was listening to cassettes back in our room, that she would be right back. She got the keys for their house, and I followed her to the door, where I promptly locked it after she stepped out. I went back to the window, and I watched her run across the driveway and across the road through a little gate at their front yard and up the walkway and up the steps of the porch. The blinking stopped as soon as she crossed the threshold of their gate, with only the porch light remaining on. I watched as my mother tried desperately to open the wrought iron screen door, and I could see her struggling with the doorknobs and alternating between fiddling with the key and yanking at the door and banging on it. She was standing with her legs apart to brace herself as she yanked and pulled on the door. This is when something at the bottom step of the porch caught my eye. A black shadow on all fours climbed out from the bushes that grew on either side of the porch steps. I was terrified, as I knew their 3 dogs were very vicious to anyone besides the older couple. But something was off though. Most dogs run and attack. This didn't seem like any normal dog. It moved like fog, gliding stealthily up the steps toward the front door, as if to avoid making a sound. It had bigger shoulders than any dog that I had seen in my life up to that point. And I stood there, staring in horror, waiting to see my mom be attacked by this big black dog. She continued to bang and scream, and that's when it happened. The dog seemed to tiptoe slowly up to my mom and just disappear through her legs and into the door. Like it went right through the wrought iron and the solid wood doors and was just gone. The lights flickered on and off again in the front rooms for a few seconds, and then suddenly, the wrought iron door swung open and my mom fell back, nearly rolling backwards down the steps. She got up and went to work on getting the wood door open. It opened easier than the first, and then she disappeared inside, leaving the door open and was gone for a good few minutes. In that time, the inner wood door moved back and forth, but not like wind was pushing it. It seemed very choppy, almost glitchy if you could imagine that. I could see lights flickering on and off inside of the house, and I thought I saw a dark figure with massive shoulders standing upright in the doorway when it had reopened all the way. I was staring so intently that when my mom emerged suddenly, carrying the granddaughter with Irene following right behind, it startled me. They ran across the road and up the driveway, and I hurried over to unlock the door for them. The girls were crying when everyone stumbled into our house. My mom was trying to calm down the granddaughter and trying to get answers from Irene about what happened. My mom's face was white as a sheet, and her eyes were big. Looking back now, I can register the amount of fear she felt. Irene was going on about how they were in the den at the back of the house, just watching a movie. And then they heard something crash in the front room. There was a large area of wall that was opened up, sort of like a window, between the den and the kitchen. And then, the same thing from the kitchen to the front room, creating a sort of openness from the front area through the house and then to the den. Irene said that when she stood up to look through the front room, she saw a large black figure, wide shoulders that looked more like a beast than a man, standing in the front room. Huge, bigger than any man she had seen, and he didn't seem fully solid. The lamp that lit the front room, Its light wasn't completely blocked out by the figure. She could kind of see through it. She screamed and grabbed the granddaughter and ran into the bathroom that was off to the side of the den. She locked the door thinking that it was an intruder and tried calling my mom from the phone in that bathroom. The phone was also a toilet paper holder. Yeah, the 80s was a really strange time. She said that she couldn't get through at first, and all she could hear was a deep voice laughing on the line. And when she finally got through, it was laughing so loudly, she didn't know if my mom could hear her shouting for help. This must have been when my mom heard the static. When my mom was trying to redial and there was no answer, it was because Irene heard banging on the bathroom door. This bathroom had another door that led into one of the bedrooms, and even though she was terrified, Irene led the little one into that room. She then locked the door to the bathroom and ran across to lock the other room that led to the hallway. She grabbed the phone from the bedside table and took it to the closet and stacked several suitcases in front of her and the little one, putting themselves as deep into the corner of that closet as possible. When my mom finally got through to them, as she was putting her shoes on to go over there, Irene was hysterically trying to relay her message of fear through gasp and mumbled phrases. My mom just told her that she was on her way and then laughed. Irene said that the whole time they waited in that closet, she could hear snarls and growls and things breaking in other rooms. The dogs in the backyard were going wild, barking. She heard the door of the bedroom open and something huge slowly walking toward the closet. She said the footsteps sounded loud and heavy. Just then, the doorbell rang and she heard banging on the door. It was my mom desperately trying to get in, and this seemed to stop whatever was coming for them. But she was too terrified to move from the closet, so they waited until my mom got into the house. She said that it seemed like forever. My mom had gone into the house yelling for them and flicking lights on, and when she got into the room they were in, they called her and she dug them out of the closet and brought them back. My mom never saw anything while she was there. No man, no beast. I had been quiet the whole time just listening. I was searching for answers in her story, and when I couldn't find any, I began waiting for my turn to speak. My mom got up and went to get them some water and some tissues to wipe the tears from their faces. As they sat there sniffling, I decided that it was my turn, and I asked, "But what was that big dog? And why did it go through the door?" "What do you mean?" my mom replied. She had stopped walking midway back to the sofa where the girls were sitting. I was still standing in the middle of the room, and I pointed out of the window to their house. "Well, when you were on the porch fighting with the door, I saw a huge black shadowy dog walk out of the bushes and then up the porch steps and through your legs. It disappeared through the door. How did you not see it? It was right there." I was pointing more intently at the window in the direction of their house now. And once more, the blood rushed from my mom's face and she nearly dropped a cup of water. I don't know what you mean. The dogs were in the backyard. I heard them barking," she replied, sounding as if her throat was as dry as the desert we live in. And by this point, I was practically jabbing my pointer finger towards the house with every other word. "It wasn't shaped like those dogs. Its shoulders were too big and it moved like smoke. It went right through your legs, Mom." And I became frustrated. The look on her face changed as she stared at me. Why was she avoiding it? What was it?" I demanded vehemently. And how did it crawl straight through the door?" She stood there frozen, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't know if she was afraid that I might be seeing things or that she went into a dark house right after that thing. She finally blinked, a single tear rolling down as she quickly wiped away, and she handed the girl some tissues and a cup of water. She turned to me and looked at me in a way that I'll never forget and simply said, "You saw nothing. You imagined it." And she continued consoling the girls. They called the bar that the older couple had gone dancing at and had them paged. When they called back, my mom explained what had happened and they rushed home, police arriving soon after. The police searched the whole house and found no one there, no sign of forced entry, no person or people, and no dark shadows, but there were broken knickknacks and decorations throughout the house, a few picture frames knocked off the walls. But in the end, they assumed that it was somehow an intruder, and they said that my mom must have scared them when she came for the kids. And since she left the door wide open when they ran back to our house, the suspects most likely snuck away. Nothing was missing from the house. Since that day, I only mentioned to my mother one other time of seeing dark shadow people. She looked at me the same terrified way that she had that night, and I never brought it up again. I hate that look. It made me feel wrong or bad, and I started thinking about all the absurd, unexplained things that I'd seen for as long as I can remember. My earliest memories started around 3 years old, and I can remember lots of things, like eyes staring back at me from dark corners, faces seemingly to melt momentarily, dark shadows during broad daylight, things disappearing and reappearing in other rooms, or days later, or things moving in my peripheral vision. But I never knew that other people didn't see this stuff too, until that day. I'm an adult now, and I still fear the dark. I almost always have that feeling that something is watching me, but now I hesitate to look back. I fear what I might see. That scares me, knowing since I was 6 years old that I shouldn't have seen that stuff at all. That hasn't stopped me from having dozens of other terrifying experiences and still seeing things that my eyes can't explain. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.